Chosen one, pause for a second. Have you ever looked at your life and quietly wondered, why does everything feel different for me? Not better, not worse, just different. Like you've been walking through the same world as everyone else, but somehow experiencing it on a completely different frequency. And maybe, just maybe, you felt this way since childhood. Not because something supernatural was handed to you, but because something inside you has always been awake. And if that feeling has been following you for years, then what you're about to hear might finally make sense of it. Because there are certain patterns, quiet, hidden signs that show up in people who are going through a deep inner awakening. Not loud, not obvious, but powerful enough to shape your entire life. And the first one begins earlier than most people realize. You didn't fit in, even when you tried. As a child, you may have played the part. Smiled when expected, followed the rules, stayed in line. But deep down, there was always this quiet feeling. Like you were observing everything from a distance. You noticed things others ignored. Energy in rooms, tension in voices, emotions behind words. And sometimes, you couldn't even explain why you felt uncomfortable. You just knew you did. It wasn't rebellion. It was awareness, before you had the language to understand it. And that awareness didn't fade as you grew older. It only got stronger. You started questioning things earlier than most people. Not in a loud, argumentative way, but internally. Why do people follow paths that make them unhappy? Why do so many conversations feel empty? Why does success look so different from what I feel inside? These weren't random thoughts. They were the beginning of self-reflection. And while others were busy adapting, you were quietly analyzing. That's not confusion. That's depth. Another sign, you've gone through emotional highs and lows that changed you. Moments that felt heavy. Situations that forced you to grow faster than you wanted to. At times, it may have felt unfair. Like you were being pushed harder than others. But those moments did something important. They made you aware of yourself. Your reactions. Your thoughts. Your patterns. While some people avoid discomfort, you were shaped by it. And slowly, you began to understand something most people never stop to consider. Growth doesn't always feel good, but it reveals who you are. There's also a strong chance you felt disconnected from things that once felt normal. Old habits, old environments, even certain people. Not out of arrogance, not because you think you're better, but because something inside you changed. And suddenly, what used to feel right no longer aligns. That can feel lonely. It can make you question yourself, make you wonder if you're drifting or losing something. But in reality, you're not losing anything. You're refining. You're letting go of versions of yourself that no longer match who you're becoming. And that process is rarely comfortable. Another quiet sign. You spend a lot of time in your own mind. Thinking, reflecting, replaying moments. Trying to understand not just what happened, but why it happened. You don't just experience life. You process it. And sometimes that can feel overwhelming. But it's also where your clarity comes from. Because every time you sit with your thoughts, instead of running from them, you build a deeper connection with yourself. And that's something most people never develop. There's also this feeling that your path isn't meant to look like everyone else. You've probably tried to follow the normal route at some point. Do what's expected. Fit into a structure. Follow a predictable path. But something inside you keeps pulling you away. Not recklessly, but persistently. Like a quiet voice saying, "This isn't it." And even if you can't fully explain where you're going, You know you're not meant to stay where you are. That's not confusion. That's intuition trying to guide you, even before everything makes sense. Another sign. You value truth over comfort. You'd rather face something real, even if it's uncomfortable, than live in something easy but false. And that creates a different kind of life. Because when you start choosing truth, you naturally outgrow illusions. And that can change your relationships, your decisions, even your identity. But it also brings something powerful. Clarity. And finally, you're becoming more aware of yourself in ways you weren't before. Not just your strengths, but your flaws. Not just your goals, but your habits. You're noticing patterns, catching your own behavior, questioning your reactions. That level of awareness is where real transformation begins. Because once you see yourself clearly, you can start shaping who you want to become. Not based on pressure, not based on expectations, but based on truth. And maybe that's what all of this has really been about. Not being chosen in some external sense, but choosing to become more aware, more intentional, more real. So if you've been feeling different, questioning more, pulling away from things that no longer feel right, it doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It might mean something is changing within you. And that change is asking for your attention, not your fear. So don't rush it. Don't force answers. Just stay present with it. Pay attention to your thoughts, your patterns, your growth. Because the more you understand yourself, the clearer your path becomes. And if this message resonated with something deep inside you, take a moment and acknowledge that. You're not alone in feeling this way. There are others quietly going through the same shift. Learning, unlearning, evolving. If you're ready to keep exploring that journey, stay connected to this space. Like the video, share your thoughts below, I read them, and subscribe to Last Call for the Chosen. Because this isn't about becoming someone else. It's about finally understanding who you've been all along, and there's something else you may have noticed, something subtle but persistent. You've always been drawn to meaning, not surface-level conversations, not distractions that fade after a few minutes, but depth. Even as a child, certain questions stayed with you longer than they should have. You didn't just want to know what. You wanted to understand why. Why people act the way they do. Why emotions feel so strong at times. Why some moments feel empty and others feel unforgettable. And that curiosity didn't disappear. It matured. It turned into a quiet search for purpose, for alignment, for something that actually feels real. While others may chase noise, you've always been pulled toward meaning. And that's not something you can fake. It's something that grows inside you over time. Through experience, reflection, and honesty with yourself. There's also this pattern. You go through phases where everything becomes quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but a kind of stillness where things slow down. You pull back. You observe more. You speak less. And during those moments, it can feel confusing. Like you've lost your energy, or disconnected from everything around you. But those phases aren't empty. They're reset points. Moments where your mind and emotions are processing everything you've been through, making space for a new version of you to emerge. Most people run from silence, but you've learned, even if it took time, that silence reveals things noise can't. It shows you what matters, what doesn't, and who you're becoming beneath all the distractions. And here's another quiet sign. You've become more selective with your energy. Not everyone gets the same version of you anymore. Not because you've become cold, but because you've become aware. You've realized that where you place your attention shapes your life. So you started choosing differently. Conversations that feel real. People who feel genuine. Environments that don't drain you. And yes, that can make your circle smaller. But it also makes your life clearer. Because you're no longer trying to be everything for everyone. You're learning to protect your peace and invest your energy where it actually matters. And that shift changes everything. So if you've been feeling this pull toward meaning, experiencing these quiet phases of reflection, and becoming more intentional with where your energy goes, you're not drifting. You're refining your direction, slowly, intentionally, becoming more aligned with who you truly are. And that journey, it doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. And if you look even deeper, there's one more pattern that often goes unnoticed at first. You've been building strength in silence. Not the kind of strength people applaud. Not the kind that gets attention or validation. But the kind that develops when no one is watching. When you're dealing with your thoughts alone. When you're figuring things out without guidance. When you're learning how to stand back up after moments that nobody even knows about. That kind of growth is invisible but powerful. Because it doesn't depend on recognition. It depends on resilience. And over time, you stop needing external approval just to feel stable inside yourself. You start trusting your own judgment more. Even when it's not understood by others. Even when it goes against what's expected. And that creates a quiet confidence. Not loud, not arrogant. Just steady. There's also something important happening in your awareness of time. You've probably noticed how quickly you've changed over the years. Things that used to matter don't hit the same anymore. Old versions of yourself feel distant, almost like another person. And sometimes that can feel strange. Like you're looking back at your own life and realizing, I'm not who I used to be. But that's not loss. That's evolution. Most people don't notice their own growth because it happens slowly. But when you pause and reflect, it becomes obvious. You're not repeating cycles anymore. You're breaking them. And even your mistakes, they don't define you the way they used to. Instead, they're becoming lessons you actually carry forward. That's maturity in motion. Another thing you may recognize. You've started valuing solitude differently. Before, being alone might have felt uncomfortable or empty. But now, it often feels necessary. Not because you're avoiding people, but because you need space to hear yourself clearly. In silence, you process things better. You think deeper. You reconnect with what actually matters to you. And slowly, solitude becomes less of a gap and more of a tool for clarity. There's also a shift happening in how you see challenges. What once broke your focus now builds your awareness. What once felt like setbacks now feels like redirection. Not everything makes sense in the moment, but over time, patterns start to appear, and you begin to understand something important. Life doesn't always stop things from happening. It often uses them to shape you. That understanding doesn't make everything easy, but it makes you more grounded, more patient with your own process, and less reactive when things don't go as planned. Because you're starting to see the bigger picture, even if it's still forming. And maybe that's the real shift happening inside you right now. Not becoming someone else, but finally understanding yourself on a deeper level. Not rushing your path, but learning to walk it with awareness. Not searching for certainty everywhere, but building trust in your own growth. And as all of this unfolds, you might realize something quietly powerful. You were never behind. You were simply becoming. And that becoming is still happening. Right here, right now. So don't underestimate the phase you're in. Even if it feels unclear. Even if it feels slow. Even if it feels like nothing is changing. Because beneath the surface, everything is shifting. And if you're still here, still reflecting, still growing, then you're exactly where you need to be in your journey. And as this awareness deepens, something inside you starts to change in a very quiet way. You stop looking for quick answers. You stop expecting everything to make sense immediately. Because you begin to understand that real growth doesn't arrive like a sudden moment of clarity. It builds slowly, layer by layer through experience. And that patience changes how you move through life. You become less reactive, more observant, more intentional with your choices. Even when things feel uncertain, there's a part of you that doesn't completely panic anymore. It just watches, processes, learns, and that shift alone is powerful. Because most people stay stuck in repetition. But awareness creates interruption. It breaks the cycle. It gives you space to choose differently. Another thing you may start noticing. Your interests begin to change. What used to entertain you might feel less important now. What used to excite you might not hold the same weight anymore. And at first, that can feel like disconnection. But in reality, it's refinement. Your mind is naturally moving toward things that feel more aligned with who you're becoming. Deeper conversations, more meaningful goals, more intentional living. It's not about losing interest in life. It's about upgrading your focus. And that process often feels quiet before it feels clear. There's also something happening in how you handle emotional pressure. Situations that once overwhelmed you now don't shake you the same way. Not because life became easier, but because you became more aware of how you respond to it. You've learned to pause before reacting, to breathe before deciding, to reflect before concluding. That space between emotion and action is where real strength develops. And slowly you start realizing you're not just going through life anymore. You're actively participating in it. With awareness, with intention, with responsibility over your own growth. And maybe one of the most important realizations you'll come to is this. You were never meant to stay the same. The discomfort, the questioning, the inner shifts you've been feeling, they're not signs of something going wrong. They're signs of something evolving. Because anything that grows must first feel unstable. Anything that transforms must first break old patterns. And anything that becomes stronger must first be challenged. So if you've been in a phase where things feel uncertain, it doesn't mean you're lost. It means you're in transition. And transitions are never fully clear while they're happening. They only make sense in hindsight. So instead of rushing to figure everything out, start noticing how you're changing. Your thoughts, your reactions, your boundaries, your awareness. Because that's where your real progress is showing. Not in sudden external changes, but in subtle internal shifts. And if you've reached this point in your journey, still reflecting, still questioning, still growing, then you're already moving forward in ways you may not fully see yet. But you will, in time. And until then, keep paying attention to the person you're becoming. And as you keep moving through this phase of inner change, something very important begins to happen quietly in the background. You start trusting yourself more, not in a loud, overconfident way, but in a calm, grounded way. You don't need constant validation like before. You don't need everyone to agree with your decisions. You don't need external approval just to feel certain about your direction. Instead, you begin to listen inwardly, to that subtle voice of clarity that becomes stronger with awareness and weaker with distraction. And over time, that voice becomes something you rely on, not because it is perfect, but because it is yours. And that changes everything. Because when you stop outsourcing your direction to the world, you begin to reclaim your life. There's also a shift happening in how you view your past. Moments that once felt heavy or confusing don't hold the same emotional charge anymore. You can look back at certain experiences and finally see them differently. Not as punishment, not as random pain, but as chapters that shaped your understanding of yourself. And even if you don't have full answers yet, you no longer feel trapped by those moments. You start seeing a bigger pattern, a slow unfolding of awareness. And that gives you peace in places where confusion used to live. Another subtle change. You begin to care less about fitting into expectations that were never really yours. Society's timelines, other people's opinions, old definitions of success. They start to feel less like rules and more like options you don't have to follow. And that realization is freeing, because it reminds you that your life was never meant to be a copy of someone else's path. It was meant to be understood and built from your own awareness. And yes, that path may feel less predictable, but it becomes more authentic, more aligned, more real. And through all of this, something very important is forming inside you. Resilience that doesn't depend on circumstances, because you've already learned how to sit with uncertainty, how to move through confusion, how to keep going even when clarity is still forming. And that makes you stronger than you realize. Not because nothing affects you, but because nothing defines you permanently anymore. You understand now that feelings pass, situations change, phases evolve, but awareness stays with you. And that awareness becomes your foundation. So if you're in a season where you feel like you're becoming someone new, even if you can't fully describe who that is yet, that's okay. You don't need full clarity to continue growing. You just need honesty with yourself in each moment, and willingness to keep observing your own transformation without rushing it. Because what's happening inside you is not random. It's a process of alignment, slow, subtle, but powerful. And one day, without even realizing it, you'll look back and understand something clearly. You didn't lose yourself. You found yourself, piece by piece. And when that realization finally settles in, it doesn't arrive like a loud moment of celebration. It arrives quietly, in ordinary days, in simple decisions, in moments where you react differently than you used to. You won't even notice it at first. But one day, you'll face something that once would have shaken you. And instead of spiraling, you'll pause. You'll think. You'll breathe. And you'll respond from a calmer place inside yourself. And in that moment, you'll realize something powerful. You've changed. Not because life stopped being difficult, but because you stopped meeting it with the same inner confusion. That's what growth actually looks like. Not perfection, not sudden transformation, but quiet evolution in how you carry yourself through life. And as this continues, your relationship with uncertainty also changes. You stop demanding that everything be clear before you move. You start understanding that clarity often comes after action, not before it. So you begin taking steps, even when the full picture isn't visible. Not recklessly, but courageously. And each step teaches you something new about yourself. Another layer, another pattern, another piece of understanding. And slowly, your confidence stops being based on outcomes. It starts being based on your ability to adapt. That's a deeper kind of strength. There's also a shift happening in your emotional world. You begin to feel things more clearly, but react less impulsively. You notice emotions without becoming them. You observe thoughts without being controlled by them. And that space you create between feeling and reaction becomes your freedom. Because now you are not just living inside your emotions. You are learning how to understand them. And that changes how you experience everything. Even relationships start to feel different. You become more honest with yourself about what feels mutual and what doesn't. What feels draining and what feels supportive. What feels aligned and what feels forced. And instead of ignoring those signals, you start respecting them. Not with anger, but with clarity. And through all of this, something very important becomes clear. You are no longer the same person who started this journey. But you also haven't become someone completely different. You've become someone more aware, more intentional, more conscious, more connected to your own inner world. And that is the real transformation. Not becoming someone else, but finally becoming present with who you are. So if you've been feeling this quiet shift inside yourself, this sense of change that you can't fully explain yet, don't ignore it. Don't rush it. And don't judge it. Because what feels like uncertainty right now is actually the beginning of understanding. And you don't need to have everything figured out today. You just need to keep growing through what you're noticing. Step by step, moment by moment, until one day, you realize you've been building yourself all along. And as this process continues, something even deeper starts to unfold within you. You begin to see life differently, not as a race to reach somewhere, but as a journey of constant becoming. You stop measuring your worth by speed. You stop comparing your timeline to others. You stop assuming you are late or behind. Because slowly, you understand something important. There is no universal pace for growth. Everyone is unfolding in their own way, at their own time, through their own experiences. And your path, with all its pauses, shifts, and inner questions, is still moving forward, even when it doesn't feel obvious. Another change begins to appear in how you handle yourself internally. You become more honest with your thoughts. Instead of escaping discomfort, you start facing it. Instead of ignoring confusion, you start observing it. Instead of suppressing emotions, you start understanding them. And that honesty builds something powerful inside you. Self-respect. Not based on achievements, not based on validation, but based on awareness. Because when you start confronting your inner world instead of avoiding it, you begin to trust yourself more deeply. And trust in yourself is something that cannot be given by others. It is built through experience, through reflection, through mistakes, through learning how to stay present even when things feel uncertain. And as this trust grows, your decisions begin to shift too. You stop choosing what only feels easy in the moment and start choosing what feels right in the long run. Even if it takes patience, even if it takes discipline, even if it takes walking alone for a while. There's also a quiet strength forming in you now. A strength that doesn't need to prove itself. You no longer feel the need to explain your entire journey to everyone. You don't feel the urge to be fully understood by every person you meet. Because you are starting to realize something simple but profound. Not everyone will see your growth the way you feel it. And that's okay. Your awareness is yours to carry. Your transformation is yours to live. And your understanding of yourself is something that unfolds internally first, before it ever becomes visible externally. And maybe that's why this phase feels so personal, so quiet, so reflective. because it's happening where no one else can fully see it. But you can feel it in your thoughts, in your reactions, in your awareness, in your choices. And over time, all of this begins to shape a new version of you. Not a perfect version, but a more conscious one, a more grounded one, a more self-aware one. So if you're in a moment right now where life feels like it's shifting from the inside out, where things don't feel fully familiar anymore, where you're questioning, reflecting, and slowly changing, don't rush to escape it. Stay with it long enough to understand it. Because what feels like uncertainty today may become clarity tomorrow. And what feels like confusion right now may actually be the early stage of alignment. You are not falling behind. You are unfolding. And everything you are experiencing right now is shaping the direction of who you are becoming next. And if you stay with this journey a little longer, you start noticing something even more subtle happening in your everyday life. Your awareness begins to sharpen. Small things you used to overlook now stand out. The tone in someone's voice, the intention behind words, the energy behind actions. You don't just hear people anymore. You start reading situations more deeply. And this isn't about suspicion or overthinking. It's about clarity. Your mind is becoming more observant, more present, more tuned into reality as it is, not just how it appears on the surface. And with that awareness, your choices become more intentional too. You stop reacting instantly to everything around you. You pause more. You think more. You respond with more understanding instead of impulse. And slowly, life starts feeling less chaotic inside your mind, even if the outside world stays the same. Another shift begins to happen in your priorities. Things that once felt urgent don't feel as important anymore. The need to impress, the need to prove, the need to constantly be seen or validated. It all starts losing its grip. Not because you stopped caring about life, but because you started caring differently. More about peace, more about clarity, more about direction that actually feels right for you. And this shift changes your inner world in a powerful way. You begin to value depth over distraction. You become more protective of your time, your focus, and your emotional space. Not in a closed-off way, but in a self-aware way. Because you start realizing something important. Your energy is not unlimited, and where you place it shapes who you become. There's also a quiet strength developing in how you handle setbacks now. What used to break your focus now teaches you something. What used to feel like failure now feels like feedback. What used to feel like confusion now feels like part of a bigger learning process. You don't avoid challenges anymore the way you used to. You face them with more awareness, even if you still feel uncertain at times. And that alone is growth. Because strength is not about never struggling. It's about continuing to move forward while you're still learning. And as all of this unfolds, something deeper becomes clear inside you. You are no longer the same person who used to react to life automatically. You are becoming someone who observes life before responding to it. Someone who reflects before deciding. Someone who understands before judging. And that shift changes everything from the inside out. So if you've been feeling like your mind is different lately, like your awareness is expanding, even if it feels overwhelming at times, don't see it as confusion. See it as development. Because growth often feels like imbalance before it feels like stability. And right now, you are in the middle of that transition. Not stuck, not lost, but actively becoming more aware of yourself than ever before. And as this awareness continues to grow, you'll slowly realize something powerful. You were never just going through life randomly. You were learning how to understand it and yourself at the same time. And that understanding is still unfolding within you. And as this unfolding continues, something very quiet begins to happen in the background of your life. You start becoming more comfortable with not having all the answers. That urge to figure everything out immediately, it slowly loses its pressure on you. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started understanding something deeper. Clarity is not always instant. It develops over time, through experience, reflection, and patience. And that realization brings a strange kind of relief. Because you stop forcing yourself to rush through a process that was never meant to be rushed. Another shift begins to appear in how you see your own story. You stop viewing your past as something you need to fix or erase. Instead, you start seeing it as something that shaped your awareness. Even the difficult parts, even the confusing chapters, even the moments you didn't understand at the time, they all start to make more sense, not because they change, but because you change. And that changes your relationship with yourself. You become less harsh in your self-talk, less critical of your journey, more understanding of your timing, your decisions, and even your mistakes. And that inner softness is not weakness. It's maturity. There's also a deeper emotional shift happening. You begin to feel more grounded in your own presence. You don't rely as heavily on external noise to feel okay. You can sit in silence without needing to escape it. You can be alone without feeling empty. You can think without feeling overwhelmed by every thought. And that stability inside you, it becomes your anchor, even when life feels uncertain around you. At the same time, you may notice something interesting. Your intuition becomes quieter but clearer. Not louder, not dramatic, just more steady, like a subtle sense of knowing, guiding you in small decisions, small moments, small choices. And when you listen to it, things tend to feel more aligned. Not perfect, but aligned. Another important change starts happening in your identity. You stop trying to become who you think you should be, and start paying attention to who you naturally are when you're not performing for anyone. What you enjoy, what feels authentic, what feels draining, what feels real. And slowly, you begin to adjust your life around that awareness. Not all at once, but gradually, step by step, choice by choice. And that's how real transformation actually works. Quiet adjustments over time, not sudden personality changes. So if you've been feeling like your inner world is shifting in ways you can't fully explain yet, if your thoughts feel deeper, your awareness sharper, your emotions more reflective, don't panic, don't resist it, and don't label it as something wrong. Because what you're experiencing is not confusion. It's expansion. You are seeing more, feeling more, understanding more, and becoming more aware of yourself in the process. And even if it feels overwhelming at times, it is still movement. It is still growth. It is still you, slowly becoming someone more aligned with your inner truth. And one day, without even realizing how it happened, you'll look back and see that every quiet moment, every question, every phase of reflection was actually building the foundation of who you are becoming now.